invite you to join me in Genesis chapter 5. Genesis 5, probably easy to find, but if you need help, you can find it on page 4 in the blue ESV Bible in the seat back in front of you. We're going to be looking at all of Genesis 5 this morning, the whole chapter. The title of our sermon is Death Reigns. A few weeks back, as we were closing out Genesis 3, I quoted the lines, "Each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." The Apostle Paul describes this same truth in Romans 5. Just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. For whom the bell tolls and Romans 5 both encapsulate the big idea of our passage today here in Genesis 5. Genesis 5 demonstrates the harsh reality that sin brought death into the world, and death's reign of terror extends to all men at all times and in all places. And yet also, as Romans 5 bears out, Genesis 5 also helps us to see that we may escape death's cruel dominion by one means, and one means only: faith. We saw in Genesis 4:1 that a genealogy of Adam is started and abandoned there. We were told that Adam fathered Cain, who fathered Enoch, who fathered Irad, who fathered Mehujael, who fathered Methushael, who fathered Lamech. Lamech, the seventh from Adam, is a representatively wicked figure whose sexual perversions, extreme violence, and arrogant blasphemies build upon Cain's fallen life and his murder and deception. And really, these two men in particular cast a shadow over the entire line. And so, murder and deception are abounding in the world. And yet, we get a brief mention of Lamech's children, their cultural achievements. Things are bad, but common grace exists, even in Cain's line. And yet, at that point, it is abandoned, the genealogy of Adam through Cain down to Lamech. But then Adam, we're told, knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, expressing hope in God's appointment of another offspring in the place of Cain's brother Abel, whom Cain had murdered. Seth then fathers a son and named him Enosh, at which point we're told people began to call on the name of the Lord. The author then properly introduces us here in Genesis 5 to the genealogy of Adam. Verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. We've said this a few times. I think it's worth repeating here. This word, generations, it's a word used throughout Genesis to connect one major section to another. We read it in 2:4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. And then we're given a narrative description of what became of the heavens and the earth that ended in what we saw last week in 4:26. In short, the principal guardian of the heavens and the earth, mankind, rebelled against the Lord and brought covenant curses down upon himself and that which was under his domain. And so pain, conflict, and death entered the world. Now this section that begins here in 5:1 is briefer, at least in terms of word length, though not necessarily in terms of actual chronology. It runs from 5:1 all the way to Genesis 6:8. It ends, Noah finding favor in the eyes of the Lord. 6:9 then begins the third major section with the generations of Noah. And so this section here, 5:1 to 6:8 of Genesis, answers the question, what became of Adam? and it demonstrates the result of sin in the human race. Of particular interest today in chapter 5 is the outworking of the curse through death. Yet, the author's perspective is not hopeless, for there are indeed thin but real rays of light that shine through the gloom of these 32 verses. And so I want to read them all, and then we will outline the sermon and text and get to work. Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived after he fathered Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord had cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Well, there are three things that I want you to consider with me this morning. First, in verses 1 to 3, we will see the beginning of Adam's proper genealogy through Seth, alongside a reminder of man's glorious origin. Second, in verses 4 through 32, we'll see the reign of death over Adam, as well as Seth and his posterity. And then third, what I want to do is double back to a couple spots in verses 4 through 32 to see that in the midst of darkness, light, nevertheless, is shining through. So look with me in the first place at verses 1, 2, 3, where we see Adam's proper genealogy begin. We ask, what became of Adam? Well, first, we see a connection between this section and what has preceded it. We're reminded of Adam's glorious origin. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, male and female. He created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. Now, without retreading all the ground we covered back in Genesis 1, 26 through 28, we should make a few observations here about the image of God in man. First, both in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 5, there is a stress placed upon the singularity and the plurality of mankind in connection with being made in God's image. Man Mankind, a singularity, is created as male and female, a plurality. As in God, so in mankind. God is one in three. There is a unity and differentiation within God, so it is within mankind. And the author has twice now connected this reality with the image of God in man. And so we see that corporately, as the human race, God's image is seen in us, and that we are one race, mankind, comprised of two sexes, male and female. But we also see that there's a blessing connected with the bearing of God's image here. To understand the blessing mentioned in 5:2, which isn't really elaborated here, we must not forget that in Genesis 1, we explicitly hear God blessing man and giving him a charge to fill the earth, to subdue it, and to rule over it. Genesis 1:28 says, "And God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it.'" And so this is connected to the image bearing that we have here, and this blessing that God gives to man regarding his charge to take dominion over the earth. Man's position as Lord over the earth, therefore, must be understood as in relation to his position under God as servant. God gave man a charge, so he is Lord over creation, but he is servant to Yahweh. We also see here that the Lord names man. This is not something that's come up in our discussion thus far about God naming man, but we have seen this language elsewhere or in other scenarios here in the creation account. We discussed how Adam was responsible to name the animals, demonstrating his authority over them. We see this in him naming his wife. We see the wife naming her children. And so God names mankind, again, demonstrating his authority over the human race. Now, Genesis 5 is important in its restatement of man in God's image because some have argued that the fall basically obliterated the image of God in man such that it's now no longer true that man bears God's image. They would say that Genesis 5 tells us that while man was created in God's image, he is now no longer bearing the image. And while that perhaps from Genesis 5 is plausible, there are some reasons to reject such thinking. Genesis 5 does indeed affirm that even after the fall, mankind still bears God's image. For one, probably the easiest and most obvious is that James in the New Testament explicitly affirms then that people are made in the likeness of God. But here in Genesis 5, we're told that Adam fathers a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. Now, it's true that Seth is not said here to be in God's image, but in Adam's. It would seem to be a waste of space to nearly quote verbatim Genesis 1 about Adam having been made in God's image after his likeness, and then to say that Seth is in Adam's likeness, if the point isn't also that Seth, in Adam's likeness, bears God's likeness. Seth in the image of Adam, in the image of God. Though, through Adam, we might say he bears a distorted image of God. And so here in these opening verses here, 1 through 3, we see Adam's glorious origin, and we've been introduced to the beginning of his lineage through Seth, who even in a cursed world bears the image of God. Well, look with me in the second place at verses 4 through 32, where we see the reign of death in the world set before our eyes in an unrelenting fashion. The unmistakable drumbeat of these verses is a particular refrain, "And he died." 8 times that phrase is used in these verses. Horatius Bonar referred to the word as the solemn toll of the patriarchal funeral bell. Adam, we're told, was 130 years old when Seth was born. He lived another 800 years after that. He and Eve had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. That's how this section begins. And it's worth considering here for a moment. 930 years. That's a long time. Frankly, it's a staggeringly long time. So staggering, in fact, that these ages have been viewed by many as merely symbolic, literary devices, rather than any kind of historical accounting of these men's actual ages. And admittedly, in a world where 70 or 80 years is pretty good to make it that long, there's something appealing about such an approach, to see these ages as symbolic. The problem, or one of the problems, is that it's not obvious from the text that we should understand them symbolically, nor is it obvious what all of the ages would symbolize. Now, admittedly, not all of the textual witnesses to this passage have the exact same numbers for each age listed. And so, using Genesis 5, if you kind of swing to the other side of like a full-blown symbolism, using Genesis 5 as a science or history textbook to mathematically scrutinize, rationalize, and correlate these lifespans to, say, determine the age of the earth is going to be an exceptionally difficult task. And it's a task that's likely well beyond the point of Genesis 5. Gordon Wenham makes an interesting comment here that I find helpful. Rather than attempting to die on the hill of finding either symbolic or historical truths in the precise ages of the patriarchs, he wonders, could it not be that the precision of the figures conveys the notion that these patriarchs were real people, while their magnitude represents their remoteness from the author of Genesis, and we might add even more so for us? Now, how they lived as long as they did, we might say that they lived that long because the antediluvian world was of a different quality than the post-diluvian world. So the pre- and post-flood era of the world, that things were different there, or the people then had different or better genetics, being not as far downstream from the entrance of sin into the world. But at the end of the day, we need to take God at His word. We need to appreciate the fact that, like we saw last week, these were real people. They were real men, and they lived significantly longer lives than we could ever dream of living. And yet, whatever you do with the ages of these men, we must recognize that this passage confirms on repeat and as central the theme that God's threat from Genesis 2:17 was real. Ever since the day Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree, the knowledge of good and evil, death has been on parade. Since the day they ate of it, death has been wreaking havoc in the world. And so yes, these individuals, we're told here, live 10 lifetimes in one. But the message for almost every single one of them is exactly the same. And he died. Adam died. Seth died. Enosh died. Kenan died. Mahalalel died. Jared died. Enoch, well, we will come back to Enoch, but his son, Methuselah, oldest man, oldest age recorded in Scripture, died. As well did his son, Lamech. Right? The point is it's unmistakable. It's undeniable. Death has invaded the world and has taken a position of dominion over the human race. Over and over, the blow falls hard upon us as we read these words. Look, as I was reading it earlier, and you can get caught up in the pronouncing the names or getting the numbers right and not switching the numbers around or saying the wrong thing. But if you slow down and you focus, what is it? That's the focus. There is a pattern that's repeated, and it all ends up in the same place. And he died. Now, Genesis 4 interestingly enough, does not recount Cain's line with that repetition of death. I don't know if you noticed that, but we're not told how long the men in Cain's line lived. We're not told that they died. Perhaps the two murderers in the line left the author unconvinced that he needed to mention death's presence in the line of Cain. But it's an interesting question. How these two lines, they're being contrasted in some way. Why are Cain's descendants not said to have died there, and yet Seth's descendants are? Why are we so constrained here to see not only how long they lived, but that they died? Well, I will say I'm not entirely sure. But I think this is a valid consideration that I offer to you. What we saw last week with the line of Cain and its association with murder, deceit, sexual immorality, and blasphemy, we saw nevertheless that line was permitted to grow in knowledge and in skill in God's world to make technological advancements in cultural achievements. Nothing is said about cultural achievements in such terms with Seth's line, and yet we would be wrong to conclude that they simply sat on their hands and never advanced anything. Equally so, we see here the godly line of Seth associated with calling on the Lord's name, walking with him, hoping in the promised seed. We see they are still subject to the curse of death. And so there's a comparison and a contrast being made here between the two lines. The one wicked line is nevertheless given common grace and permitted to grow in wisdom and skill in the world to a certain extent. Likewise, the line of Seth associated with calling on God's name still has to die. Cain's line dying is not surprising. They're taking their own lives. Seth's line might be more surprising to us, though, unexpected. And so it's important to note, even the chosen line through Seth is subject to the reign of death. And so it's a bleak picture. But we see in the third place, in two places here, in verses 21 to 24 and 28 to 32, we see the faint rays of light shining through the gloom. First, we see Enoch in verses 21 to 24. Enoch, we're told, walked with God. In fact, we're told twice here in 22 and 24. He walked with God, and then he was not, for God took him. Now, you might be inclined to think, well, that's just a weird way of saying that he died. But Hebrews explicitly prevents us from doing that. Hebrews 11, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death. And he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And so Enoch doesn't die. And herein lies one thin but certain ray of light shining through the clouds. One commentator notes this about Enoch in this passage. He says, only once is the monotony of that refrain of death broken. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The phrase is full of meaning. Enoch walked with God because he was his friend and liked his company, because he was going in the same direction as God. He had no desire for anything but what lay in God's path. We walk with God when he is in all our thoughts, not because we consciously think of him at all times, but because he is naturally suggested to us by all we think of. As when any person or plan has become important to us, no matter what we think of, our thought is always found recurring to this favorite object. So with the godly man, everything has a connection with God and must be ruled by that connection. Later he says, things were not made easy for Enoch. In evil days, with much to mislead him, with everything to oppose him, he had by faith and diligent seeking to cleave to the path on which God walked. Enoch walked with God. Jude references seemingly the extra biblical book of Enoch. And he says, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict all the ungodly, that their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, of all the harsh things spoken against him. And so Enoch here is set before us in contrast with Lamech from Cain's line. Remember, we saw that Lamech is the seventh from Adam through Cain. Enoch is the seventh from Adam through Seth. We have in these sons of Adam, then, two representative figures. Lamech, a perverted, murderous blasphemer, and Enoch, a man of faith who pleased God, who walked with God, and prophesied against the wicked of his day. And so what's the point? Why does this happen to Enoch? Why is it recorded for us? Well, death reigned over all of Adam's children, except one in this passage, except Enoch. Lamech stretched out his hand and killed a man. Enoch stretched out his hand of faith and did not even see death himself. Does the faith of Enoch, his trust in Yahweh, and his rescue from death not foreshadow and signify exactly what the Lord Jesus promises in John 11? To the grieving sisters of Lazarus, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Friends, do you believe this? Do you believe the words of Jesus? Do you believe in Jesus, who, unlike Enoch, did in fact see death and tasted death, not because of his own sin, but so that through death he might destroy the devil and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery? It's Hebrews 2:14 and 15. So we look at Enoch and we're left asking the question, do I believe? Do I have faith in the Lord? A faith by which only I may escape the curse of death in the world. Not to mean that Christians don't die, that we're all transported to heaven, as it were, without dying, but that through dying we live. But continuing down the line, we don't just see Enoch here. We come to Lamech in this genealogy, the ninth from Adam. We learn that Lamech fathers a son and names him Noah. Now, in Cain's genealogy, Lamech and Enoch receive slightly more attention than the others, in large part to distinguish them from the Enoch and the Lamech in Seth's line. Interestingly, both Lamechs have speech recorded. Both of them speak, and we hear what they say. The former, Cain's Lamech, defiantly recalls the curse of Cain, the revenge of Cain. Right? Do you remember what he said? He said, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, mine is 77-fold. The latter Lamech, Seth's Lamech, recalls the curse on the world, not in rebellion and in arrogance, but in hope. Seth's Lamech says, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one, this child shall bring us relief from our work and the painful toil of our hands. And so Enoch, Seth's Enoch, and Cain's Lamech, seventh from Adam, are set in contrast. It seems also that Seth's Lamech and Cain's Lamech are set in contrast. Think also about how long this Lamech lived, 777 years. Could his life of 777 years perhaps not be a subtle or perhaps not so subtle jab by the providential hand of God in light of wicked Lamech's boast of a 77-fold revenge? Cain gets a 7-fold revenge, Lamech claims a 77-fold revenge, and then God gives the other Lamech a 777-year lifespan. Yet we see another contrast between the two Lamechs here. We noted that there's a progression of sin through the generations of Adam, through Cain to Lamech. Right? There was sin and hiding in Adam and Eve's part. There was sin and lying, outright deception. Adam and Eve hid, but they did tell the truth. Cain then actually perjures himself before God. And then Lamech writes a song about his transgressions. He's not ashamed at all. Well, in like manner, we have a progression of hope and faith in the generations of Adam through Seth to this Lamech. Adam and Eve's hope in Cain is fairly subtle. I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord, says Eve. Their hope in Seth is perhaps reserved, but it's unquestionably explicit. God has appointed a seed, an offspring for me, in the place of murdered Abel. And then here, Lamech's hope in Noah bears no mark of reservation nor doubt. He simply exclaims great hope that this one shall bring relief and rest. He will deliver the human race from the painful toil of their hands. The name Noah itself sounds similar to the Hebrew word for rest. And then we're told Noah, the 10th from Adam, bears 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Cain's Lamech is the 7th from Adam. Enoch is the 7th from Adam through Seth. Noah, the 10th from Adam. 10, like 7, is another number in Scripture that represents a sense of completion, perfection. And so Enoch and Noah, with Lamech as well tied in there, are particularly important in Seth's genealogy. Cain's line culminates with Lamech in the birth of his 3 sons. Noah is what you might call the pre-flood culmination of Seth's lines, and he also bears 3 sons. So how do we bring these rays of light together? If Enoch provides hope for the escape from death, Lamech and Noah provide hope for life under the curse. Now there may be some irony here, since Noah is indeed part of God's plan to relieve creation from the burden of the curse, but it's not in the precise way that Lamech may have thought. We're not given any more details about what Lamech thought. You know, we saw Eve. She thought she fully understood God's plan with Cain, likely. But her hopes are dashed through his crimes, yet they aren't obliterated. She recommits herself to the Lord. She hopes in His word at the birth of Seth. Lamech here also, he hoped in coming relief from the curse through the birth of a son. But did he fully grasp the manner that relief would come? Maybe he did, and maybe he didn't. But what we know, if you've read on beyond Genesis 5, relief and rest would indeed come, but not without judgment. And indeed, this man Noah, as we read in chapter 6, verse 8, he was to find favor in the eyes of the Lord. And it would be through him and through his line that the line of Seth would be continued till the promised seed should come. But it would come at a great cost. What we're about to see in the coming weeks, Lord willing, Noah and his immediate family alone would pass through the judgment of the chaos waters to survive into a renewed and a cleansed world. Now, there's more to say about Noah in the coming weeks. But it's worth quoting here now, I believe, what Hebrews 11, after commenting on Enoch's faith, says about Noah's faith. It says, by faith he constructed the ark for the saving of his household, condemning the world and becoming an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. And so, are you like Noah, an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith? Are you like Lamech, hoping in God to redeem you from the curse? Are you like Enoch, walking with God? In other words, are you looking to the greater Noah through whom we shall be redeemed and rescued, far as the curse is found? And as it is with Noah, so it is with Christ. It is Christ's family alone who shall pass through the coming judgment, not of water, but of fire. Christ's family alone shall make it through into the fully renewed and fully cleansed world. Now, this theme of judgment is significant, and we would err not to mention it here. Because notice the New Testament says of both Enoch and Noah that Enoch prophesied against the ungodly and Noah condemned the world. We're living in times strikingly similar to the days of Noah. And so we must ask ourselves, do I speak up and speak out against ungodliness around us? Not out of a sense of pride or superiority, but in the hope of redemption. Are you, by faith, heralding to a dark and dying world that there is a coming judgment, but there is also a way of escape and that there is relief and rest to be found? Right? What does the poem say? Therefore, sin not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And yet, if because of one man's trespass death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ, says the Apostle Paul. And so, friends, wrapping it all up here, death indeed came into the world. He came into the world, set up shop, and began to reign. But his reign is coming to an end. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? He says the sting of death is sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. So death is here in the world, but his power has been and is being broken by the work and the power of Christ as he brings all things into submission under his feet. And we wait for the last enemy, death, to be destroyed. And until that day, we gather once more at the table to eat and drink from the Lord's hand.